They will tell you the palaces were perfect, that the queens who ruled them were living goddesses bathed in light. That is the lie you were meant to inherit. The truth smells different. It rots in the air. It clings to silk gowns like a curse. And once you hear it, you will never again see a crown without imagining the filth beneath it. Step with me through the gates of Versailles, through the marble corridors of Whitehall, into the rooms where history's most powerful women lived, and decayed. Look past the gold leaf and crystal. Past the illusions spun by paintings and propaganda. Look closer, closer, until you see what the court poets dared not describe: skin cracking under layers of poison, hair alive with crawling things, teeth blackened by rot, the human body corroding beneath the weight of divine image. These were not fairy tale princesses. They were prisoners of a higher game, the performance of perfection, a performance that required them to kill themselves slowly, every day, in service to an image their subjects believed divine. They ruled empires while their blood carried lead. They held court while lice feasted on their scalps. They sealed treaties while their breath could fell a man at arm's length. And still, the world called them beautiful. Understand this: filth was not an accident of the age. It was policy. Washing was suspect, even heretical. Dirt was armor, a badge of nobility. And the grotesque rituals that replaced cleanliness, powders, paints, scented oils, were not harmless traditions. They were chemical shackles, tightening around the mind and body until there was nothing left but the mask. If you've ever wondered how power truly works, study these women. They were the embodiment of controlled decay, a living metaphor for kingdoms themselves. Outward brilliance, inner rot. And the deeper you go, the more you realize, this was not just about hygiene. It was about control. Psychological control. A court steeped in discomfort was a court too distracted to rebel. Queens who suffered quietly became symbols of endurance, willing to die for beauty so their empires could live in illusion. You are not ready for what you're about to hear. But readiness is irrelevant. The door has already shut behind you. And what comes next will strip the last illusions you have about royalty, until you see the crown for what it always was, a gilded cage that stank of death. It begins with water, or rather, the deliberate absence of it. You've been told that queens bathed in rose petals, that marble tubs overflowed with luxury. But in truth, most of them touched water less often than a soldier in a month-long siege. And when the moment did come, the rare, ceremonial bath, it was not cleansing. It was spectacle. Picture it, a wooden tub hauled into a grand chamber, draped in linen to shield delicate flesh from splinters. Steam curls into the air from buckets carried up from the kitchen since before dawn. Servants move like shadows, eyes lowered, for they know what's coming. The queen, a woman whose beauty has been preserved not by purity but by poison, disrobes. The air shifts. Not the fragrance of perfume, but the pungent, sweet-sour stench of skin long sealed under lead paint and sweat. The first ripple of water is a signal, and then, the mask begins to dissolve. Days, weeks, sometimes months of unwashed cosmetics sliding away in greasy swirls, the surface of the water clouding like milk. And there it is, the face the portraits will never show you. Cracked skin, flaking in layers. Redness blooming where poison has seeped too deep. The delicate blue tracery of veins, visible because the flesh has thinned under the assault of chemicals. This was not neglect. It was ritualized decay. Physicians of the age warned against frequent washing, claiming it weakened the body's vital humors. Water, they said, could penetrate the skin and disrupt balance. Dirt became a shield. And over that shield, the paint, always the paint. White lead for divine pallor, rouge to simulate the blush of health, scented oils to mask the reality that skin beneath was suffocating. And the queen? She sat in that warm, gray water like a high priestess in a sacrificial rite, her attendants carefully removing flakes of lead and skin from her face, only to prepare her for the next cycle. Within hours, the mask would be reapplied. The pores sealed again. The decay hidden under a perfection so blinding that no one would dare speak of the truth. It is here, in the quiet steam of that chamber, that you begin to understand, the filth was never just physical. It was symbolic. A body trapped in its own poisons is a mind easier to control. Pain was not a flaw in the royal life, it was part of the architecture of power itself. The lead paint was more than makeup. It was a weapon, and the queens who wore it were both its victims and its executioners. Venetian ceruse, they called it. White as bone dust, smooth as ground marble. A mixture of vinegar and finely milled lead that dried to a ghostly sheen, a pallor that whispered of divine blood untouched by labor or sunlight. To the court, it meant perfection. To the body, it meant war. Each morning, the queen awoke beneath yesterday's mask. It had cracked in the night, the tiny fissures releasing faint metallic notes into the air. Her skin, deprived of air for days, wept beneath the layers. But water was forbidden. Instead, her ladies-in-waiting arrived with fresh brushes and paste. They did not remove what was already there, they buried it. A new layer over the old, sealing in the sweat, the oils, the toxins. The mask grew thicker with each day, a geological record of vanity and submission. This was more than habit. It was dependency. Lead, once absorbed, begins its slow assault on the nervous system. The mind frays at the edges. Memory slips. Mood turns volatile, sudden rages followed by hours of fogged thought. The courtiers saw it. They whispered of the queen's moods, her divine eccentricities. They did not recognize the signs of poisoning, or perhaps they did, and chose to remain silent. A ruler softened by confusion is easier to steer. There is a reason the portraits stare back at you with such stillness. In truth, these women were often exhausted, their bodies heavy with a strange fatigue, their hands trembling under layers of silk. The lead thinned the hair, blackened the teeth, and hollowed the eyes, all of which required more paint, more wigs, more powders to hide. Every solution deepened the disease. Understand this, the court did not simply tolerate the cycle. It depended on it. A queen bound to her mask was bound to her image. Bound to her image, she was bound to the court's will. To wash her face clean would be to risk being seen as mortal, fallible, human. And that was a risk no royal could take in a world where divine right was the only armor against assassination or revolt. So the poison stayed. Layer upon layer, year after year, until the face beneath ceased to matter. Only the mask remained, and the mask belonged not to the queen, but to the power that made her wear it. They called it the Great Lice Court, never to the queen's face, of course, but in the whispers of servants who swept the chambers and shook out the bedding. You see, filth breeds life. Not the noble life of courtly bloodlines, but the crawling, biting kind. And in palaces where bathing was rare and wigs were piled high with animal fat to hold their shape, life flourished. Tiny, ravenous life. Lice did not care about jewels or titles. They nested in the curls of powdered wigs, burrowed into the seams of velvet gowns, and marched freely across the scalps of queens and courtiers alike. They were so common that scratching became a language of its own, subtle movements beneath the table during state dinners, a careful rake of the head with a jeweled ivory stick during council meetings. Even these scratching tools became status symbols, carved from silver, inlaid with pearls, instruments of quiet desperation disguised as luxury. And yet, it was more than discomfort. Body lice are carriers of typhus, a disease that killed soldiers by the tens of thousands. In the palace, they could leap from one political figure to another without anyone noticing until fever took hold. Imagine a council chamber, every handshake, every whispered strategy, every clasp of a cloak, a silent exchange of parasites. But here is where the darkness deepens. In some courts, the infestations were not treated aggressively. Why? Because a body in constant irritation is a body too distracted to plot. An advisor writhing inwardly beneath his finery is less likely to think clearly, less likely to challenge the crown. Queens themselves were not spared. They would sit upon thrones while lice feasted on their scalps beneath the wigs, their minds torn between the conversation before them and the unrelenting itch beneath the powder. The smell in those courts was its own kind of sickness, a mingling of perfumes, rotting hair, and the faint, sour odor of unwashed bodies. But everyone pretended not to notice. Public acknowledgement of such filth would shatter the illusion of divine authority. And so, the crawling continued. Think on this, the crown itself, the symbol of absolute power, often rested not upon clean, healthy hair, but upon nests. Gold-touching filth. Authority-feeding infestation. And in that grotesque union, the true image of monarchy reveals itself, power and decay, locked together in a dance that neither could survive without the other. Beauty, in the royal courts, was never about attraction. It was about obedience. The queens you've seen immortalized in oil paintings were not painted as they were painted as they had to be. Their beauty was not their own, it belonged to the state. Every pale cheek, every perfect curl, every ruby-stained lip was crafted to project divinity. And once that image took hold in the minds of their subjects, the queen could not abandon it without tearing apart the illusion that kept her alive. This is how control works. You bind a person to a role so tightly that abandoning it feels like death. The Venetian serrues, the wigs, the perfumes, the gowns, they weren't just tools of beauty. They were chains. A woman who could not be seen without her mask was a woman who could not flee, could not rebel, could not risk the shame of revealing her true self. And if the cost of keeping the mask was pain, sickness, even madness, so be it. The role was more important than the life beneath it. The court encouraged this dependency. Physicians warned of the dangers of lead, yet the fashion persisted because it was politically useful. An unstable queen, weakened by sickness but still radiant in appearance, was easier to guide. Her every public appearance reinforced the myth of her perfection while concealing the truth. She was deteriorating in plain sight. Understand this, beauty in the royal courts was not a gift. It was a prison cell lined with mirrors. The queens became addicted to the reflection, even as it consumed them. They would rather suffer than be seen without it. And the people, conditioned to worship the image, would never question why their sovereign always appeared flawless, even in the midst of personal decay. This is the moment where you, watching this, must decide whether you will carry this same curse in your own life, the addiction to image, the fear of being seen as you are. And if you will not, you must mark the break. Write it now in the comments so you never forget. I burn the mask. Perfume, the sweetest mask of all. In the courts of Europe, it was as essential as the crown itself. Not a luxury, but a necessity, because the air around the queens was rarely fit to breathe. Behind the velvet and lace, skin went unwashed for weeks. Wigs, packed with animal fat, grew rancid under the heat of candles. Gowns absorbed the musk of the body like sponges, trapping the scent of sweat and sickness. Without perfume, the illusion would collapse in a single breath. And so, the royals drowned themselves in it. Not the soft, fleeting scents you know today, but heavy, cloying concoctions of ambergris, civet, musk, and rose oil, perfumes with the weight of another presence in the room. These were not meant to please, they were meant to conquer. When the queen entered, the scent hit before her eyes did, before her voice carried, a wall of fragrance announcing that power had arrived. But perfume was also a weapon. In a time before germ theory, it was believed that disease traveled through foul smells, the miasma. A courtier might survive a plague outbreak if he carried a pomander ball stuffed with herbs and spices. Queens used this belief to their advantage. To mask the stench of illness, decay, or even death itself, rooms were flooded with scent. Attendants burned scented wood, scattered rose petals, doused tapestries in aromatic oils until the very walls seemed alive with perfume. Visitors, overwhelmed, could not tell where the fragrance ended and the body began. There is a darker layer to this. Perfume did not just hide reality, it rewrote it. When the queen's breath was soured by rotting teeth, the air between her and her subjects was thick with rose and amber. When her skin, under the powder, was raw and inflamed, her presence was still enveloped in jasmine and violet. Those who inhaled it were lulled, even seduced, into forgetting the truth their eyes might have caught. Scent became a kind of hypnosis, a sensory veil that reinforced the myth of beauty and health. But the same perfumes that masked the rot also poisoned. Ambergris was cut with alcohol. Civet was extracted from the glands of caged animals and carried diseases. Oils steeped in lead-based tinctures seeped into the skin. Every breath that others took in admiration, the queen inhaled in quiet ruin. Power always demands a cost, and for these women, even the air they breathed was part of the price. The hair. It was never just hair. In the royal courts, it was architecture, towers of curls, braids, and plumes that scraped the ceilings, each strand lacquered into place with animal fat until it gleamed like polished marble. These towering constructions were symbols of status, works of art, and perfect breeding grounds for disease. Beneath the pearls and ribbons, the truth festered. Wigs were rarely cleaned. The animal fat used to shape them, bear grease, mutton tallow, ox fat, turned rancid in days, drawing vermin like a feast. Lice thrived in the warmth, burrowing deep where no comb could reach. Fleas nested in the folds, biting through scalp and skin. Some women awoke to find tiny creatures scattering across their pillows, others never noticed at all, so accustomed were they to the constant itch. The stench was its own kind of torment. Fat gone sour, hair powder clinging to sweat, perfume fighting and failing to mask the decay, together they created an odor so thick it clung to clothing and lingered in rooms long after their occupants had left. But no one dared suggest a queen dismantle her coiffure. To do so would strip away her symbol of power. Hair was more than ornament, it was armor. A towering wig meant time, money, and attendance, a visible display that one's life was untouched by the labor of survival. Some styles were worn for weeks without removal. At night, the hair was swaddled in cloth to protect the shape, trapping heat and moisture against the scalp until sores formed. Wounds festered, hidden beneath curls dusted with flour or starch. The scratching sticks, delicate ivory claws on slender handles, became a fixture at court, used to reach under the hair and drag relief across the skin. In public, the gesture was discreet. In private, it was frantic. This was not mere vanity, it was a system. A queen's elaborate hair kept her still. Moving too quickly might dislodge the structure. Bathing would destroy it. In this way, the hair became a cage she carried on her own head. And in that cage lived more than vermin. It held the weight of expectation, the suffocating heat of ceremonial perfection, and the silent knowledge that beauty here was not for the woman, it was for the throne. The gown was the queen's second skin, and like her first, it was killing her. From a distance, the dresses seemed magnificent, silks from the Orient, velvets so deep they drank the candlelight, embroidery threaded with gold. But to wear such splendor was to submit to a slow, exquisite torture. Begin with the weight. A full royal gown could weigh over 40 pounds, layered with petticoats, whalebone stays, and jeweled adornments. The corset, stiffened with bone or steel, squeezed the torso into an hourglass the body was never meant to hold. Breath came shallow. The stomach compressed until eating was painful. Over years, ribs warped inward, the organs shifting to accommodate the cage. And yet, the court demanded it. A queen who could not breathe easily was a queen who could not shout, could not run, could not escape. Then came the toxins. Many fabrics were dyed with arsenic to achieve brilliant greens and blues, or with mercury compounds for rich reds and golds. The dyes leached through sweat, seeping into the skin. The glittering metallic threads in embroidery were often coated in lead to preserve their sheen. Wearing such a gown for hours meant absorbing poison with every heartbeat. The undergarments were no mercy. Petticoats, soaked in starch to hold their shape, chafed the skin raw. Sweat had nowhere to go, it mingled with powders and perfumes, creating a breeding ground for infections. Washing these garments was rare, fabrics degraded, dyes ran, and besides, the act of cleaning was seen as beneath a queen's dignity. Instead, the same layers were worn again and again, the filth becoming part of the garment's weight. Even movement was dictated by the dress. Trains dragged across floors, collecting dust, food scraps, and the waste of palace vermin. Skirts were so wide that queens could not pass through certain doorways without turning sideways, forcing them to move with calculated grace. Every step, every gesture was constrained, not just by fashion, but by design. Clothing became a behavioral shackle, teaching the body to obey the demands of the role. And all the while, attendants hovered, adjusting folds, carrying hems, spraying perfume to mask what lay beneath. They were not just preserving beauty, they were maintaining the illusion that the queen was untouchable, ethereal. But strip away the silk and steel, and you would find bruises on the ribs, sores on the hips, and skin that bore the silent map of decades of restraint. In the palace, beauty was a uniform, and uniforms are for soldiers in service to something greater than themselves. The feast was never just a meal. In the royal courts, it was a theater of excess, gold plates, silver goblets, tables groaning under roasted swans, glazed peacocks, spiced meats, and pastries as intricate as architecture. To the watching world, these displays proved the queen's wealth and divine favor. But inside her body, the feast was an act of sabotage. Begin with the food itself. Preservation was primitive, meat was salted or smoked, sometimes so heavily that the salt content alone could damage the kidneys over time. Spices masked the taste of decay in meat stored too long. Sugar, newly arrived from the colonies and more expensive than gold, was consumed in obscene quantities, rotting teeth until the royal smile became a mouthful of agony. Then there was the table ritual. Queens were expected to taste every dish publicly, even when they had no appetite. Poisoning was a constant fear, so official tasters sampled the food first, but arsenic could take hours or days to kill, so the queen still bore the risk. To refuse a dish might insult a guest or ally. And so she ate, again and again, whether or not the food turned her stomach. Alcohol was served at nearly every sitting. Wine, ale, or mead, safer than water in the eyes of the court, but heavy in alcohol content and often stored in lead-glazed vessels. Over time, this constant intake of lead-laced drink deepened the slow poisoning already underway from her cosmetics and clothing. The body swelled, joints ached, the mind grew clouded. But the true danger of the feast was not in what it gave, but in what it took away. Heavy meals and restrictive gowns strained the heart and lungs. The corset made digestion a slow, painful process, leading to chronic constipation and illness. Combined with minimal physical activity, the court was a world of sitting, standing, and posturing. The body weakened. A queen who could not walk far, who tired easily, was a queen whose movements could be controlled. The feast was the perfect trap, a ritual that displayed strength while secretly eroding it. Every bite taken before the court reinforced the illusion of vitality while advancing the quiet work of decay. And when illness inevitably followed, the same court that had demanded the queen's indulgence would gather in false concern, bringing more scented oils, more powders, more poison to mask her decline. Imagine her now. The queen sits upon her throne, the air heavy with perfume, the weight of her gown pressing into her ribs. Her face is a flawless mask, white as porcelain, cheeks painted with the faintest bloom of life that no longer belongs to her. Her hair towers like a monument, glittering under the candlelight, hiding the sores, the lice, the rot beneath. Around her, courtiers bow, whisper, and pretend not to see the tremor in her hands. Every eye in the room drinks in the illusion, a woman above mortality, untouchable, eternal. But the truth sits closer than they think. The lead in her paint clouds her thoughts. The poison in her drink eats at her bones. The corset carves deeper into her body with each breath. The gown, the jewels, the feast, all of it is a theater of control, built to keep her still, smiling, and bound to the role she did not choose. She knows she is dying, though she cannot name the cause. It is not a single blade or a single enemy. It is 1,000 small assassinations, each one disguised as devotion: the powder box, the goblet, the ribbon-tied wig, the gold-threaded gown. Every offering from her court is a link in a chain. And she wears them willingly, because to refuse would mean stepping down from the pedestal, and the fall from such height is always fatal. This is how power works when it wishes to remain unseen. It does not strike, it wraps you in silk, feeds you sugared fruit, dresses you in gold. It whispers that you are blessed, adored, untouchable, all while tightening the noose one delicate knot at a time. And here is the truth you must take from her story: the most dangerous prisons are the ones that look like palaces. The most effective poison is the one you are taught to crave. And the mask you wear to survive will one day fuse to your skin, until you cannot remember the face beneath. So mark this moment. Speak it into permanence: I will not wear the crown they hand me. Because once you understand how beauty was used to destroy queens, you will see how the same tools are still being used, not in palaces, but in every place where image matters more than truth.